Hello and welcome to Biology Career Insights, the podcast where we talk with experts from the field of biology to gain valuable insights into the careers and explore ways to navigate the job market in this ever-evolving field. I'm your host, Dr. Manish Kumar. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Russ Teichert. Dr. Russ Teichert is a renowned scientist and an entrepreneur in the field of drug discovery. Dr. Teichert is the founder and CEO of Scintillant Bioscience. Russ started Scintillant Bioscience in 2017 while he held the position of Research Associate Professor of Biology at the University of Utah. In July 2019, Dr. Teichert left the University of Utah to be a full-time CEO of Scintillant Bioscience, the position he currently holds. He started the company because of his belief in the potential for cell-based imaging assays to be transformative in drug discovery. Prior to starting Scintillant Bioscience, Dr. Teichert held a research faculty position at the University of Utah for 10 years. Prior to that, he worked as a research scientist at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Dr. Teichert earned a PhD degree in molecular and cellular biology at the University of Utah. He also holds an MBA from the Brigham Young University. Russ, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Manish. I appreciate the invitation. I'm happy to talk to your listeners about my journey through my career and how I came to biology. So thank you very much.
Amazing. So we will start right in, So tell us about your educational background and your journey of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so my background is a little unusual. I think compared to most people in this field. I did a master's in business administration, an MBA right out of college, which almost nobody does anymore. And I went to work at Intel. So I was not in the computer chip manufacturer. I was not in biology at all for 5 years. There was something that happened while I was doing my MBA. My younger brother died of cancer. And in the time that I was at Intel, I was just in business positions there and didn't really feel like I was maybe doing a lot of good in the world. And I think my brother's death led me to want to go back to school and make a bigger contribution in the world. Which I did. So I left my position at Intel and went back to school to pursue a PhD in molecular and cellular biology at the University of Utah. I still then didn't really directly go to entrepreneurship. I went to work at Vertex Pharmaceuticals as a research scientist, as you mentioned. And then ultimately went back to the University of Utah where I had done my PhD and accepted a research faculty position there. So I was doing a lot of basic research, which was interesting to me. But because I had the MBA and some business background, I really wanted to put those skills together, which I was not doing. And I also just always found myself more interested in the practical application of science than in the basic research questions. So I was looking for both things, to put my business and science backgrounds together, as well as to do applied science. And I'm doing that now as an entrepreneur scientist at Scintillant Bioscience. I'll talk more about the company in a moment, but yeah, I took kind of a winding path to get to where I am, but it's been a good one as well.
Amazing. I mean, as we all say that we are product of our circumstances, and I think you had a very strong purpose when you started, your scientific journey. So it was not that you wanted to be a scientist at your childhood, right? So it was just...
No, I really had not intended to pursue a career in science, even in high school, even in college. So, yeah, I came to it late.
Mhm. And what made you study biology in your college?
Um, I honestly, in high school, biology was my favorite subject.
Wow. Mhm.
And then, I thought about that as well when I was in these business positions at Intel. Um, and I just thought that biotech was going to be a place to be in the 21st century. People were talking about the biology century. Um, so, I think it was kind of a way to couple my interests as well as maybe what I thought was a growing field. And I thought it would be a way to do good as well. I really always wanted to work on therapeutics, um, and was doing that at the university in some ways, but really not in a way that we could commercialize products.
Mhm. So one thing is clear that, because you had this MBA and the business background, that kind of shaped you to be an entrepreneur at the later stage. But is that in the beginning, like beginning of your life, something that happened before death of your brother that made you think, in the beginning that you wanted to be entrepreneur? Some hidden dreams or, some childhood dreams you had of being an entrepreneur in the beginning?
I probably had some aspirations to be an entrepreneur before I had any aspirations to be a scientist. Um, Even when I was doing my MBA, I was at least toying with the idea of being an entrepreneur. Taking a job at a big company was a safe path, but wasn't one that I could ultimately become very passionate about. So, I think going back to school to do the PhD and then putting the science and the business together in what I'm doing now is a path that is much more suited to my interests.
And academia is so difficult and tough, and you were already a research associate professor. So how did you convince yourself that, I will kind of, move into this entrepreneurial thing, which is even tougher at times, right? So how did you end up starting Scintillant Bioscience? Tell us the story behind it. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I guess for full disclosure, the position that I had as research faculty was not on the tenure track. So that was part of it. Maybe had I been a tenured professor, it might have been altogether too easy to stay and just continue on that path. But it was a different track at my university. Um, I had worked on some imaging assays there that were really not specifically for drug discovery, but we were using pharmacology in these assays. And I just got really interested both from the work that I was doing there as well as what I was reading in the scientific literature about the potential to use cell-based imaging for drug discovery. And I thought it could become really transformative. It was really the early days of, I would say we're still in the early days of 3D cell culture for drug discovery, organoids and spheroids and so forth. I believe that is really where the industry is going. There's a big push to get away from animal models and animal testing, and they have not proven to be particularly predictive of either therapeutic or toxic effects of drugs. So I believed when I started the company and still believe that there is an important future in complex cell models. And those complex cell models are going to be best interrogated by imaging. And complex image analysis tools that are going to employ artificial intelligence. So those are some trends that I see that really motivated me to start this company. And, we are working as a contract research organization, so we're not really developing those technologies at this time. But I think just doing the contract work that we've been doing for our clients has been a great learning experience. And I believe it will ultimately help us, as we try to develop these new technologies that are more predictive of the therapeutic and toxic effects of drugs in vivo. So that's still a motivating factor for me, is to really improve the predictivity of drug discovery.
Mm-hmm.
I think the industry is not in a great place where 90% of drugs fail clinical trials. It's telling us that what we're doing preclinically is not very predictive. And so there's a great need to improve the predictivity of drug discovery and preclinical drug development.
Amazing. So, I mean, as you said, Scintillant Bioscience currently works as a CRO. So can you tell us about all the services that it provides?
Sure. Our specialty is, in fact, microscopy imaging, what some people call high content imaging in the industry. So we have automated microscopes that can take pictures of wells in 384 well plates, 96 well plates, and so forth, which many of your listeners will be familiar with. We develop and then implement drug discovery assays in this format for our clients. So our imaging-based assays are not just phenotypic. Many people equate high-content imaging or high-content screening with phenotypic screening. That's something we do, but we also do many target-based screens and develop those in cell-based assays where we employ imaging as well. So that's really our bread and butter. We also really can do just about anything in terms of in vitro biology for drug discovery and preclinical development. So, in addition to these imaging assays, we run lots of plate reader assays, ELISAs, Western blots, and a lot of the standard molecular biology that you would expect. So we have a fairly broad repertoire, and we're expanding that all the time. But yeah, I guess really my passion is still the imaging.
And you do provide services only to the, say B2B, or you also do it for the academic labs or, say, individual scientists? How's the model of your...
Yeah, we have worked with mostly biotech and pharma. Most of the assays we're developing are specifically for drug discovery. We have worked with academic labs a little bit when they are trying to develop drugs or discover drugs. So we do have some clients in academia, but it's primarily in biotech and pharma.
So when you thought of starting, say, Scintillant Bioscience, you as an individual would have faced a lot of problems, as in any entrepreneurial journey. So could you tell us some stories about the challenges you faced and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so starting a contract research organization is a little bit different than your typical biotech. So most biotech companies are trying to develop a technology. It may be a drug, it may be an instrument, but they're developing a technology. So typically, before they start any kind of operations, they'll do a lot of fundraising, right? They may be looking for venture capital to raise enough money to work on their technology development. I did not raise venture capital. I was starting a business where we could earn revenue from day one.
So it was completely bootstrapped, you mean?
Yeah, it was completely bootstrapped. So I did, and that was a challenge. So I did a cash out refinance of my home to take some equity out of my home to start it. I got one family member to invest in it, and then pieced together a few different loans, a couple of different equipment loans, including a small business administration loan here in the United States. Those are hard to get. They have required about 70 different documents over a period of 3 months to qualify for that loan. So I've been able to piece together funding from a few different sources. I'm not going to recommend that necessarily as a way to start a biotech company, but that was a challenge. That has been a challenge. And we're just trying to see how much we can grow through our revenue streams, through our cash flows. I think at some point I will have to raise more capital, but I think we've been able to make some pretty good progress just with the small amount of capital we've raised.
Amazing. So, fundraising is always a challenge, and in your case, it was more so because you did not approach to the venture capital firms. But apart from that, like, how did you hire? How did you kind of start your business? I'm sure, like, there are like other obstacles as well. Or how did you manage to get the projects, that you needed to?
Oh yeah.
Grow your
Well, yeah, right. That was a challenge, certainly. So my very first client was someone I'd known for a long time in the industry, and I think he just took mercy on me and sent me a little work. And we did a good job for him and others in his company. And so they introduced me to someone who was starting a biotech company. We did work for that company over the last few years and actually helped them get a drug into clinical trials, which has successfully gone through a phase 1 clinical trial now. And that's something we feel really good about. But we've mostly grown through referrals and word of mouth. And maybe that means I'm not the greatest salesman, but I think we do good work for our clients and they really appreciate it. And so in any service-based business, especially if it's an expensive service, people want referrals. They want to know that they can trust the service, and the company that they're working with. So I think we've been kind of lucky that we've been able to grow in that way.
Wow. So, with your experience in entrepreneurship, can you tell us, like, what are some of the key skills and qualities that may be required to be a successful entrepreneur, so especially in the biotech?
Yeah. Well, I think if you would have asked me that question before I started this company, I would have probably said, well, you need to be a visionary. You need to be a Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk or someone like that. And sure, those visionaries have changed the world through entrepreneurship. I think now I'm more inclined to say that things like tenacity, being very tenacious, is particularly critical because you're going to face so many more obstacles than you think you will face. And it's going to cost a lot more money than you think to be successful. It's going to take a lot more time than you think. And you really have to be tenacious. I think the willingness to pivot is very important. It's great to have a compelling vision, but the market may tell you that your vision is wrong. So if you're unwilling to pivot, you can stubbornly pursue something that's just not going to work. So I would say, yeah, a willingness to pivot is certainly important. I mean, there's many skills and traits that are important for an entrepreneur, but those are two that come to mind.
Amazing. And you were mentioning some exciting, say, developments in the field as, for example, the 3D models and, because cell culture has been done, throughout history, it has always been 2D. And now there is some pivoting towards 3D, which is a more complex model and, more, say, phenotypically similar to, what an in vivo condition may be. So, highlight those facts and why you think that, 3D cell culture methodology is the way forward.
Yeah, I do believe that 2D cell cultures still have a place. We do a lot of it for clients and mostly because they want that, they ask for it. And I still think even the imaging that we are applying to 2D cell culture is valuable. I believe that these assays are generally more informative than other types of cell-based assays, even if they're 2D. Now, I think with the 3D cell culture, even though I'm a big believer in the future of that, I do worry when I hear a lot of talks begin with a statement that, well, it's 3D, therefore it is somehow magically more physiologically relevant. And I think it's not magic. It has the potential to be more physiologically relevant if we make those models more physiologically relevant. If we can create co-cultures in a 3D model that really model in vivo biology better. We're certainly in the early days of that, right? I mean, there's a long ways to go, and I think there is a bright future, but I think a lot of that is in the future. A lot of the 3D models that exist today are maybe of questionable value. So, I think it's incumbent on those of us in the field to make those models and make them as physiologically relevant and as disease relevant as they need to be. But there are a lot of tools for doing that. iPSC-derived cell types are part of that to create these human models in vivo or in vitro. And I think just the improved cell culture conditions and organ-on-a chip kind of technologies, microfluidics and so forth. I believe there are a number of technologies that will converge to ultimately make these models more relevant and more predictive than what exists today. But yeah, a lot of it's in the future.
Amazing. So, I mean, you mentioned about microfluidics, lab on chip, the things that is kind of currently in development, right? So apart from this, are there any exciting key developments that are happening in the field? Or are there what are the trends of this cell culture field? How do you see the market moving in future?
Yeah, I guess one thing that I'm pretty certain of is that artificial intelligence is going to change everything in drug discovery. One obvious way that it will do that in my field is in image analysis. So artificial intelligence applied to image analysis will be very important. But I think every aspect of drug discovery and development is ultimately going to be transformed by artificial intelligence. And I think maybe this will seem like a tangent, but I believe that contract research organizations like ours are gradually becoming drivers of innovation in this industry. There is definitely a trend towards drug discovery outsourcing. Mm-hmm. I see it in small virtual biotechs. I see it even in large pharma. I think many organizations are questioning whether they should invest in all of the infrastructure they might need to ultimately develop a drug. And so a lot more drug discovery and preclinical drug development is being outsourced. And therefore CROs, we've got the greatest visibility into what's going on in the entire industry. We see the good, the bad, the ugly. And I think it gives us this opportunity to become the real innovators in the industry. So I don't know that a lot of your listeners will necessarily think that way, but I believe that. I see it happening.
I believe that too. And I'm seeing a trend, I'm seeing a plethora of, CRO coming up also in countries like Germany, So, and perhaps, Russ, to just add to that, for our young listeners, perhaps you can highlight the fact, why is there a need for big pharma to outsource their things? And what are the advantages that they have, when they outsource these things to a CRO?
Yeah, I think even for big pharma, investing in very expensive equipment and expertise, it may or may not serve them. What if they need to pivot away from that at some point? If you can tap into the expertise of a CRO and accomplish the same thing, it gives you a lot of flexibility, helps you to be nimble. So you can certainly question whether big pharma needs this as much as, say, mid-sized small pharma biotech. But I think it applies to all organizations in the industry. Really, if you can tap into the expertise of a CRO who is one of the world's experts in a certain aspect of drug discovery, why not? It helps everyone.
So it's all about tapping into the expertise. And I mean, I feel it's also cost effective, isn't it?
It is.
Because you can recruit you can recruit best of talents, but then to set up a whole kind of a methodology or a center for developing things will be so much, costly and also time.
Yeah. Right? And it becomes a fixed cost when you invest in it in your own company. If you outsource it, it's a variable cost. So you can use it when you need it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what advice would you give to, say, biology students who are considering a career in biotech or biotech entrepreneurship? What would be your advice to them?
Sure. Yeah. Well, if they are considering a career in biotech entrepreneurship, I would ask them, is your primary goal just to be an entrepreneur, or is it really to be a biotech entrepreneur? Because if your primary goal is just to be an entrepreneur, there are probably less risky ways to go about that, less expensive, less risky. I think your typical tech startup can become successful with less money and less risk than a biotech startup. So, that's something to consider. And I would not want to discourage anyone from pursuing a career in biotech entrepreneurship. Just that you have to understand what you're getting yourself into, right? And so if you're not really passionate about this field and creating better treatments for human patients or, doing something that would really change the world in biotech, then, consider being an entrepreneur in some other field. But I think the future is really bright also for biotech. And so, as I mentioned earlier, many people say, well, the 20th century was the century of computers and information technology. Many people say the 21st century is the century of biology and biotechnology. I think that's true. I believe in that. And so I believe there's a bright future for those who are so inclined. But, going back to mentioning tenacity is very important for a biotech entrepreneur. It's really important for even a scientist in biotech or in academia. There's a lot of failure in this field. And if you're easily discouraged by failure, you'll probably give up at some point. So whether you're a scientist in a biotech company or in academia or a biotech entrepreneur, tenacity is a pretty important trait to have.
And how important it is to, go for like a PhD and, then become an entrepreneur? Or would you advise, to kind of, if somebody is very clear about, pursuing an entrepreneurial path, does he really need to do a PhD? What would you suggest?
Yeah, it's a good question. It certainly helps in this industry to have credibility as a scientist. I think as a biotech entrepreneur, your ability to assemble a really good team matters a lot, and you do not necessarily have to have a PhD to do that. If you can assemble a team that includes PhD scientists, an undergraduate in biology, if you decide, well, I don't want to become a scientist, maybe pursue the MBA and find a way to assemble the right team and start fundraising. That I think there's many different avenues to biotech entrepreneurship. So becoming a PhD level scientist is one, but there's others.
Mm-hmm. And you had the advantage of, both the degrees. You have, the MBA, and then you also had PhD. That brings to, another question, very similar question. Do you need an MBA or do you need a business degree to be an entrepreneur? Or you think it's not necessary?
I don't think it's necessary. You, no matter what you do, you need to be willing to learn. I think many of the things I learned in business school, you can learn on your own, or you can learn them on the job. You can learn them from books. You can learn them from podcasts and all kinds of things, if you're willing. So I think just being a lifelong learner is very important, and not just for an entrepreneur, but certainly the kind of things I learned in my PhD would be a lot harder to learn on your own than the kind of things I learned in my MBA.
Yeah. I mean, especially in the information age, I think, a lot of, as you rightly said, a lot of business, say, related courses are available online, but of course you cannot be a scientist learning online. So that I totally understand.
Yeah.
So, moving back to, Scintillant Bioscience, how big is your team right now, and what is the vision looking forward for Scintillant Bioscience?
Yeah, we're a small team. We are less than 10, but growing. And I think the future is very bright for us. We really can serve any company anywhere in the world. Our clients right now are primarily local and in the Western United States. But really what our clients need from us is data. So there's no reason we could not serve anyone anywhere in the world as a CRO.
Yeah. So finally, coming to the most interesting part of the question, tell us more about your hobbies.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I don't find a lot of time to do things outside of work. I have a family. I have 4 children. So most of my time outside of work is spent with family. We do a little skiing together and hiking. So those are things we like to do. I do play piano a bit. So I guess that's a hobby as well.
Wow. And any final word of advice to our listeners who are, aspiring biologists?
Yeah, well, I guess the advice that I would give would be advice that I would give to anybody in any field. I would say, really understand what you want to do by working backwards. Sometimes students make the mistake of believing, well, because I like these kinds of classes, I will like this field as a profession. And I think really understand what the field is. What do people do in the day-to-day? What is it like? And work backwards to what you want to major in or get an advanced degree in. I think that's a better way to go. So that's the way I advise my own children. So, I would tell people who aspire to a career in biology or biotech, go find out what people do in the field. Even if it requires taking an unpaid internship or something to learn about it, you'll make better informed decisions.
So thank you, Russ. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Manish. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
And to the audience, thank you for tuning into Biology Career Insights. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and get the latest episode delivered right to your device. See you next time. Bye-bye. Bye, Russ. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.